In the next several videos, I'd like to show you how to solve for the variable x in what are known as one-variable linear equations. So let me write that down. So these equations are known as one-variable linear equations. And as you can see, they have just one variable that we have to solve for. And we refer to them as linear because all of these variables are not raised to any power other than 1. Or essentially, the exponents on these variable x's are just 1. And eventually, you'll see two-variable linear equations that might look something like this, y equals 2x plus 3. But for now, we're just going to focus on these one-variable equations. So when solving equations like this, what I first like to do is get an idea of what the equation means in English. So the way that I read this is that 9 plus some number gives me 21. And when you read it through with English, it's a lot easier to kind of guess your way to the answer. And you can see by just trying numbers that x would be 12 here. But ultimately, we want to find a mathematical way to figure out what x would be for the situations where it's very difficult or next to impossible to guess the answer. And when performing operations on these equations, I always think in terms of opposites. So let me make a little box here. And so essentially what I mean by that is that if I see addition, I use subtraction to cancel that out, because addition and subtraction are essentially opposites of each other. And if I see multiplication that I need to cancel out, I'll use division, because multiplying and dividing are opposite operations. Likewise, if I see x squared and I want to get rid of the square, I will take a square root, since squaring and square root are both opposite operations. And you'll see this pattern continue the further you go in mathematics. So now going back to this first equation here, it's like we have a plus 9 plus x equals 21. So to cancel out this positive 9, we can subtract 9 from each side of the equation. And so you get x equals 21 minus 9, which is 12. And the key point here is that if you do something to one side of the equation, you have to do it to the other side. Because if I just subtract 9 from one side of the equation, then that completely changes the equation, and you have a completely new scenario. And then once you find the answer for these equations, you want to get in the habit of checking. So take this answer of x equals 12 and plug it in back into your original equation. And basically just see if it's true. So you have 9 plus 12, and the question is, does that equal 21? And since it does, we know for sure that x equals 12 is the correct solution. So let's now move on to the second question. So we have 1/4 plus some number is equal to 3. So this is very similar to the problem before this, except now instead of having some whole number that we're adding, we have a fraction. So again, it's like we have this plus 1/4 out in front. So like the last one, when I had a number plus x and I wanted to get rid of that, since it's a positive number, I can subtract 1/4 from each side of the equation. You have to do it on both sides. So then you get x is 3 minus 1/4. And you can put this straight into the calculator, or we can find a common denominator. Saying this is 3 over 1, I'll multiply the top and bottom by 4. So we get 12 over 4 minus 1/4. And now that they have the same denominator, we can actually subtract. 12/4 minus 1/4 would just be 11/4. So in this case, x is 11 divided by 4. And if you plug that in, right here, you'd have 1/4 plus 11/4, which we know is 12/4. And 12/4 simplifies to 3. So that's how we know that this is for sure the correct answer. Now moving on to number 3, you can see we have some number divided by 3 gives us 8. So we have division by 3, and essentially our goal in all these problems is to get x equals something. So to get x by itself, we have to get rid of this division by 3. And to cancel out division, we want to multiply. So we can multiply each side of this equation by 3. And on the left-hand side, we essentially have 3 divided by 3. And whenever you have a number divided by itself, that's just equal to 1. So the 3 divided by 3 just becomes a 1, or we can essentially say they cancel each other out because now you're just left with 1x, or simply x. And when we multiply the right side, 8 times 3, we get 24. So x is 24 is our final answer. If we plug that back in to the original equation, we get 24 divided by 3, which we know is 8. So that way we know for sure that that's the correct answer. And now lastly, moving on to this fourth problem. Now we have 4 times some number gives us 48. So we have 4 multiplied by x, and we want to cancel out multiplication. And to do that, we know the opposite is division. So we can divide everything by 4, since we know that 4 divided by 4, or anything divided by itself, is always going to be 1. So on the left-hand side, we get 1x equals 48 divided by 4, which is 12. Or in other words, x is 12. And you can see this is true, since if we plug it back in, we have 4 times 12 is 48. And we know that is true. In the next couple videos, I'll work through several more examples. And at the bottom of each video will be exercises linked so that you can actually practice these problems.